know what it was? I was in the connection in my room is just dead.
Oh, swear down.
Yeah, and I prefer that because it has just, as you can see, a neater background.
Yeah. Hey man,
But
it's calm. This is a real podcast. This is a real platform.
we roll. Here we go.
Yes.
We
How you
move.
doing, man?
Yep.
How's life, bro?
I'm well, man. I give thanks. I give thanks. I'm even looking at my image on this Zoom meeting thing. I'm looking like an elder in this chair. I'm like,
Like
life is good, and I'm well. All is well.
how are you,
Uh,
sir? How are you?
oh,
uh,
I'm well. Things are going well. The grandkids are fine.
mm.
No, but yeah, man, all is well. I give thanks. Obviously, this lockdown has been a mad thing.
Yeah, man.
There's so many reasons. The casualties due to this
Mm.
pandemic, the economic um, impact, the recessions, the job losses. Obviously, George Floyd's murder and the increasing highlight of the police brutality suffered disproportionately by the so-called Black community. Um, and, we've just come into the second half of the year. So a lot's happened. And like everyone, being witness to it, but, inherently part of the whole social movement as well. And social change has been quite an interesting experience in itself. But yeah, man, how are you doing?
Yeah. Just to echo what you were saying I think with the lockdown itself in general, it was always it's been like peaks and troughs. It's been hard and it's been okay. I guess in general things have been quite good, but with what you were just explaining, I guess the social commentary on something which is close to both of us, and just seeing how much the content and the discussions and conversations and analysis and experiences surrounding this area of the world just kind of it dominated everything, and it was quite a lot to take on. I'm not gonna lie, personally. um how do you feel about it on an individual level? Because I know for me, just seeing a lot of stuff and being reminded of certain incidences and experiences, I had to take a little bit of a break away from it. And
Mm,
yeah, I'm curious, how did you feel about it?
yeah, yeah. I couldn't even bring myself to watch the entire video. To this day, it's just
Mm,
heart wrenching. Speaking of George Floyd's murder, that is,
yeah.
um, and obviously the momentum for positive social change that was documented was
Mm,
unprecedented, because I do believe, um, the civil rights movement, feminist movement, these things have been huge movements in the past, but perhaps, I'd actually probably say no, and perhaps most likely they weren't documented as well as what we saw as a result of George Floyd's murder.
mm,
So we do have to obviously consider the integral role that technological advancements by way of the internet, what role that has, in the shifting of people's consciousness. We also need to take into consideration that this is an opportune time to um, to instigate social change, because more people are indoors, and so they're less likely to be distracted by what's outside of the walls of where they live, and are most, I'd assume, more likely to look down, and at looking down, that be in the direction of their screens.
mm.
We've seen subscriptions to. Um, I feel like I should close my living room windows. Would you mind if I do that quickly? Because
Yeah, yeah, sure. Go ahead, bro. Go
zero,
ahead.
1 minute, bro.
That's calm.
Sorry.
It's okay, man. I could always cut this bit out, but maybe I'll keep it in for the realness.
For the real, yeah,
For the
man. Keep it.
realness.
Keep it. You know, life is iterative. You know,
Yeah.
life is iterative. I should let me even. Nah, I should be alright. Um, so it's yeah, we just need to be mindful of that as well. That it's just been an opportune time because a lot of people are at home. Um, you know, they're more likely to pay attention basically to
Mm,
what's going on. And one thing I have realized is how much of an influence social media has on how you view the world. Like it's always been said before,
yeah.
but when you actually take a step back and you think to yourself, okay, so you know, all these views about people saying, um, all lives matter, or you know, the separatists that are like, you know, should be black only, and etc. etc. Um, or even those who just flood their timelines with videos of people being abused by police, etc., etc. You're consuming all of that, and you have to remember that there's
Mm,
people behind these accounts who are choosing what to post and what not to post, regardless of whether they have hundreds of thousands of followings.
yeah.
What they choose to post and share is subjective.
Mm,
So you're taking in not even their world, but what they're choosing to show of the world.
yeah. And who like who are these people? Would like how would you describe the people sharing? Because I guess that's quite important, right?
Yeah. So it would be those who may not necessarily call themselves influencers, but have got loads of followers. And I'm not a fan
Sure.
of naming names because I feel like what I'm describing is a universal thing. You know,
Sure.
regardless of whether people are trying to influence or not, by default, what you share, it will influence someone to some extent because they're going to consume it and they'll have their own emotional reactions and triggers to it.
Yeah.
So it's gonna influence. You know, there was this joke that a comedian made about, what the heck are we doing using this term influencer? In the past, to be influenced was a bad thing. Like, although objectively it only means to, um, I guess, instigate a change of mindset or
Yeah.
instigate a certain behavior pattern.
Mm,
Objectively, that is. In our, when our previous generations used it, it was, oh, don't be influenced, don't be so easily influenced, because what that means is that
mm,
you're easily manipulated, and therefore you're vulnerable to harm and exploitation.
yeah.
So even in that term, social influencer, the way how we're sort of flouting that about, is quite interesting, because now it's used now with an air of, from what I've seen of it, more an inspirational tone, so
Yeah.
in terms of maybe influence to uh, adopt a new tactic playing a video game. Uh, you're being influenced to embrace your body shape, your skin tone, um, your sexuality or whatever it is.
Mm,
Um, it's more, I'd hope that the term influencer is being used for those who are inspiring those to embrace their uniqueness, in an empowering way rather than a disempowering way, you know? Um,
mm,
and a lot of people are just tired of like the big broadcasters like the BBCs, etc., etc., who, as objective as they may like to appear to be, they still present again a certain view of the world. You look at Russia
mm,
Today, Al Jazeera, BBC, Sky News, and a
mm.
whole heap of other American news broadcasters. Let's not even talk about that. They
Well,
all have their angle.
yeah.
They all have their angle. And so now people are looking at people are looking at these individual influences now for an alternative, viewpoint.
Mm. I've like fully agree with you, and I think what you were mentioning about um where the information is coming from. So you mentioned like Sky News, Al Jazeera. I think what's important now is to realize that with any content that comes out, like you were saying, there is always an agenda behind what is then being thrust in front of people. And with like influencers, I think it's also good to remember that even as an individual, you can still have an agenda and uh, there's a wider reason for why, okay, I chose to have this messaging on the platform which represents me today or yesterday or a week ago or for tomorrow or whatever it is. And I think it's important to understand like where that's coming from.
Mm,
And I also think that that if we get, because we've gotten to a stage where it has, we've got this I'd hate to call it a theme, but for lack of a better word, theme,
mm,
generally because of the way social media works, you have like the period where a lot of people are talking about a certain subject and then they move on to something else. We had a really long stretch of discussions which are really important, and I think like I know a lot of people who thought that there was some like conspiracy or agenda for race wars and these kind of things as the reason for this content becoming um, popular. And actually, really, I think it's really important to know that this all stems from an objective suffering and an objective pain. Obviously, then people can use and co-opt and weave that in their own ways. Yet I still think it's really important to know, okay, at the root of this all, there's a lot of pain and suffering.
exactly. And I think that's such an important point to make because, let's be blunt. I don't think I know anyone who totally knows exactly what's going on
Mm,
whether there is whether they could say for 100% that yeah, certain things are being plotted by a certain group of people, and run with it. I'm noticing the room's getting dark. This is the last time I'll get up. I'm just gonna put the light
okay,
on.
that's all. That's cool.
It's very quick. Um, Sorry, man. I should have
No, it's all right, bro.
been way better prepared, but I'm here. I'm here.
We're rolling, man. We're rolling.
You
Iterative,
know.
like you said.
Sorry.
Iterative, like you said, man.
Exactly, man. Exactly. It's all a process. All a process. Um, yeah, and so with that, I think it's important to still acknowledge people's hurt, regardless of whether they know for sure whether things are being intentionally orchestrated by a group of people or not. People are
Mm,
still feeling triggered. People are still feeling hurt, and um, we'd be wise to not ignore that
mm,
because oftentimes these things that are hurting them externally, the reason for their triggering is also coming from something that's quite latent within them. It might be a personal experience. In the case of George
mm,
Floyd, they might have experienced racism, and then suddenly they're seeing, this so-called black person having, a police officer's knee on his neck,
mm,
and that just screams. Of course, there's been so many different, I think quite powerful articulations of that scene in itself and what it means.
mm.
Um, like him screaming um, for air. Do you know what I mean? And that
Yeah,
that being symbolic of the fact that many people do feel suffocated by society. They feel suffocated not only by this man's uh, uh, Floyd's plea for air, Floyd's scream of "I can't breathe." That's how many people feel just on a day to day. Like, why can't I just be myself? To breathe is a very natural thing, you know. Um, and that's it triggers a lot of people because it's also something that for a lot of non-white people they feel like they're battling on a day to day, you know, and so when
yeah.
faced with now this very public execution, which is very indicative of the racial injustices faced by black people in America particularly.
Mm,
It's undoubtedly just going to trigger all these emotions. I think where we need to now be the momentum is definitely, I think, especially amongst the so-called Black community anyway, is there. It's not going to die out. And I've said this to people who are
Mm,
non-white, and I've said, to be frank, um, so-called Black people are the only ones who are going to really have their own backs,
mm.
because, and I say that because, look how quickly our timelines have changed. Do you know what I mean? And it,
Yeah,
within some instances, it was within like 2 weeks that people's timelines started turning back to cats and dogs and strolls in the park and stuff. Now, I don't think that's a good or bad thing. I just think that that's just a good reminder of how this world works.
yeah,
Not disregarding the emotions and obviously the severity of the injustices faced by so-called Black people across the world, but people's attention naturally shifts from one thing to the next. People have lives to live. And so, as much as we might feel this as a community, as much as we might feel hurt by this and angered by and frustrated and empowered for positive change,
yeah,
we shouldn't necessarily expect that to be automatically translated outside of the community. And that's not
mm,
necessarily saying that those outside the community are good or bad,
yeah,
because really there is only one community, which is the human race. But the socio-political construction of race
mm,
is what we're all falling for,
yeah,
and it's what certain so-called um, white people who are in positions of power, such as Derek Chauvin.
mm,
Um, it could be that in their minds they're like, this socio-political construct of race and racism
mm,
subconsciously justifies how I treat non-white people. I don't know what's going on through his
yeah,
head, but that's what would seem like is a very common interpretation of that kind of behavior that a police officer
mm,
like Derek Chauvin, um,
yeah. It was like a metaphor, a representation of that feeling, and I think that's why it resonated so much for a lot of people, because they may, like you said before, that's a very visceral, that video, which I like you haven't really watched in its totality because I just can't
it's
yet.
hard. It's hard work.
Yeah, just even the little clips, it just hits a chord that you already
Mm.
know what this is. You don't need to watch the rest, really. And I think what happened there for a lot of Black people is that it was a visceral representation of um, what you just explained, the socio-political construct, essentially suffocating us metaphorically, and knowing that in those officers' minds, that was what justified them to carry that out.
Yeah.
Yes, I am more valuable than you. You are a lower being than me. Therefore, it is okay for me to do this. Like
Mm.
the nonchalance was actually more telling rather than the actions themselves. Because obviously,
Yeah.
people can, humans can be violent by nature. Yet it was the nonchalance and the air of, yeah, I'm justified to do this. I have the power to do this. That was more the more visceral and painful part of that experience for a lot of us. And yeah, we're definitely going to talk about it more as we go through the podcast. But I'm gonna introduce it before we go way off on a tangent.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for
Um,
real.
so for everyone who's listened up to this point, say welcome to the Garden of Edun podcast, where ideas grow. And Sam is someone I'm really excited to have on, and I was gonna explain why, but at uni when I first met Sam, his name wasn't just Sam; it was Uncle Sam. And no, I don't mean the tax man from the USA. I mean Uncle Sam. And I was gonna explain why, but I feel like the last few minutes gave a clear indication of why he was given such a title. Sam, welcome to the podcast today, man. I'm glad to have you on, bro.
Thank you so much, man. It's an honor. I absolutely love the name of the podcast and the strapline. It's awesome. And I'm honored to be here, man. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
No worries, man. I so today's podcast is going to be towards the creative element, because obviously this podcast is about creativity and creatives' journeys. But I feel like what you were saying as well, this particular issue of social justice for the Black race has so much traction right now, and I feel like these conversations are important. And the other thing is, I feel like something that you're doing in your or with your time is actually an avenue towards bringing that justice. And I'm talking about hidden pages, of course. So for those people listening, give them like a quick introduction to hidden pages and what that project is for you, and what it aims to do.
For sure. So, Hidden Pages is a project which aims to collate the achievements of so-called Black people throughout history all over the world in a digestible form and one that's visually appealing. That's what it is in a nutshell. Why I created it was because from a very early age, I had the privilege, which, by the way, a so-called white person told me I did actually. I had the privilege. This was in her words, which I thought it was really powerful and really striking. The privilege of knowing this information of so-called Black people's achievements throughout history. And so because of that, I was like, I'm kind of a bit frustrated that we're in the 21st century and we're still talking about race. And more so, those who are so-called Black around me are still feeling marginalized, are still feeling that they're experiencing instances of racism, etc., and are still feeling senses of insecurity as well. And I knew that a big part of my not feeling all of those things, not necessarily being completely immune to those feelings, but a big part of me being able to hold my head up high from quite frankly, an ego stance and a persona stance was that I knew those who had the same skin tone as me, same nose, lips, eyes, hair, had done great things such as build pyramids in alignment with stars, contributed heavily to the civilization of Europe. Case in point being the Moors, who were so-called Black Muslims, who gave a whole load of scientific, philosophic, literary, musical, hygiene treasures to Europe and the Western world. So in knowing this, you then have that, it proves what the elders say, right? About if you know your history, there's a sense of pride. And it just seemed to me that whether or not people knew this, it just wasn't being overtly stated. And that bothered me. And I was like, why hasn't this been done yet? Why isn't there some sort of an archive or a digital platform which is easily accessible, which highlights what the truth is, that so-called Black people have been around for time. Do you know what I mean? And that the earliest ancestors of the human race can be traced to people that look like you and I. And I thought that this information not only is important, but it can be shared in a way that is it doesn't have to necessarily be so politically charged.
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily have to be so binary as Black versus the rest. It doesn't have to be like that. Truth is truth, and doesn't need these extra accolades of and it's us versus them, etc. I wasn't interested in that. That does nothing.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, it does nothing. And the reason why I say that is because fire will only fuel fire. I'm not necessarily saying excusing the abuse of a particular group of people and then saying, oh, well, that's just how it is. But
Mm-hmm.
rather, when you state the facts and you come with evidence from sources that are reputable, I say
Mm-hmm.
reputable like so because really what I think is reputable in this day and age only means, perhaps, a certain group of people, a significant proportion of people trust a particular or reference a particular source as
Mm-hmm.
being trustworthy. But it could also be the case that another source that doesn't have a significant proportion of people representing it, or sorry, consulting it, could also be reputable. So 100
Yeah.
people could look at BBC, and because 100 people look at BBC, it's like, oh yeah, that's more reputable than CNN, where it's only got maybe one viewer. But that's not necessarily the case, you know.
Mm.
But that's just a side note on how, even what's reputable is subjective. Um, but yeah, I thought a way of uplifting the so-called Black community, as well as educating literally all of humanity,
Mm.
just to present information and be like, look, here's what the first person to reach the North Pole looked like. There were two Black Queens of England. Here's who they were, and here are some sources that prove, their existence.
Yeah.
Here's the earliest, complete skeleton of modern Britons 2,000 years ago looked like. Here's a source.
Mm.
It's I love that way of addressing issues. Facts and figures. Give me the facts and figures, because to be blunt, everyone has their subjective upbringing. Everyone has their individual beliefs based
Mm-hmm.
on their individual experiences.
Mm.
There are seven, I think maybe even eight now, billion people. There's multiple billions of people on the planet. There's many
Yeah.
worlds on this one planet.
Yes.
The world being the individual perspectives that we all have. So it's going to be quite exhausting to try and mobilize 7 billion worlds into one,
Yeah.
unified looking at the world. It's a lot of effort. So I was just like, you know what? The facts and the figures speak for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Here are the facts and the figures, and here are the sources. And I
Yeah.
just, yeah, and that was how Hidden Pages was born. I was like, people just need to know that you so-called Black people have been there for time, and we've
Yeah.
done great things.
I think it's really like, first off, I think it's a brilliant idea, and just on the point you were making of, it's almost like seamlessly saying, yo, we've been here for time and we've been just that, like, not average in sense of average, like lower than, but we've just been here, and like we've been part of society. We've equal on an equal standing and just doing our thing. And I think that's a really important narrative, because a lot of the time it can be peddled as, oh, slavery and then civil rights movement. And it's kind of like we're always seen as the bottom of the barrel, and we've had to uplift ourselves. And I think when
Mm.
we learn about history in this way, firstly, we become aware of the fact that, okay, so with the transatlantic slavery in particular, they had to actually justify race as a means for doing that, which
Yeah.
means that actually before then, things were not the way that they're depicted now, as us being at the lower end of society, which means that that narrative is not real. It's not real. It was fabricated. And then what it also does is, like you said, gives people self-esteem. And even to reference myself, and this is something I'm going to ask you a bit more on after giving some context. So, growing up, I never really had like, my mum tried in areas, but I guess my knowledge of Black history was lacking as I was growing up. And really, it wasn't until uni, and I went to university. So obviously, we went to University of Nottingham, which is Russell Group Uni, and mostly middle class white people attend this university.
Which, by the way, I had no idea until my final year, interestingly enough. But anyway, yeah.
No way.
Pro
You
talk.
you were living in a
Sounds
different world.
cliche. I was just like, everyone's just everyone. Like I didn't care, but yeah. Sorry to
Yeah.
abruptly.
Which is interesting as well because that might speak to the fact that you had the knowledge of this history made you not even aware of that dynamic. Do you know what I mean? Um, but yeah, for myself, going into that environment, I quickly became very well aware of being black. And
Mm,
because I didn't have that footing to stand on, I remember those feelings of having insecurity and these things kind of popped up by surprise because I wasn't really aware of them growing up as a young buck, probably because there wasn't that much racial disparity in terms of there being an overwhelming majority and I guess in this case overwhelming majority white. So I remember my first year I had all these like doubts and insecurities and feelings and kind of um, did almost see myself as lower than in some way. And it was after my first year that I started, so the summer after first year of uni, that I really started exploring um, a different narrative of Black history. So I did something called Black History Walks in London. If you've heard of that, all right, that nod tells me you're very well aware.
we support each other every now and again with we share each other's posts and stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh,
They've been
nice.
at it for time. They're OGs. They're
Yeah.
literally OGs. Yeah.
Like I feel like, yeah, because I think when I went in 2012 for one of the walks, we went through like Trafalgar Square and walked through that kind of area of London, and they showed us all these very subtle bits of history, but it's there, it's plain and it's there, but we're never really taught this. Um, and that was probably the main thing I found so interesting. Like, wow, I'm 19, going on 20, and this is the first time I've become aware of how embedded in even just British culture, which would paint that, well, we only arrived here as slaves, and then the Windrush, and then suddenly all you blackies were here. And actually, there's a lot more. There's a lot more of a richer and more nuanced story to how Black people have actually been in this country for multitudes of generations, just for a very long time. So I'm curious to know for you, like you said from an early age, what was that journey like to then become aware of this stuff? Was it like a parent, um, one of your parents pointed you in the direction? Was it your own kind of curiosity and inquisitivity, or how did you then become aware of this? Because obviously in the school system it's not actively taught, and we can get onto why later. But for you, what was the
Mm.
process of coming to understand this um, truth of history?
Yeah. So for me, and what I feel as the deep grace and blessing that I had
Mm,
was in my own family. You know,
mm,
my siblings making me aware of the fact that I think first of all that the ancient Egyptians known as Nubians
mm,
were black, so-called black. You know, that opens up you know when you're a child, a lot of your thinking is to do with association because you don't really know how to fill in all the gaps yet. You don't know your thinking isn't really uh maybe it's deep for me personally anyway. When I thought about things, I often associated them with certain things. So for the Egyptians, for example, when
mm,
I heard about them as a child, I remember feeling a sense of mysticism, intrigue, um, greatness. It is all very broad terms and very elementary terms, but at that age, those were the feelings and feats that I associated with ancient Egypt. Mythology, you know,
mm,
anthropomorphized animals, having animal heads on human bodies. You know, this very mystical
mm.
world. So to then hear that the ones who constitute this culture look like me was completely like mind blowing. I felt like I'd been given a gift that was so sacred and secret. Because even at that young age, we're probably talking between maybe age like 13, 12, 13.
Yeah.
I just had a sense that this wasn't widely taught. And that up until my 13 years, up until that point of of 30 years on the planet, I hadn't ever had an inkling of that in my school education system.
Mm,
Fortunately, I had a very, happy upbringing, which I'm very grateful for. I don't remember experiencing overt racism and stuff like that at school. It was a multicultural school that I went to. I was born and raised and still am, thank God, in a multicultural, which doesn't necessarily mean integrated,
yes.
but multicultural
Mm,
worlds, which I wanted to make the most of, you
mm,
know. Um, and the way I did that was just by having an open mind and learning and learning and learning. Um, so it was definitely siblings and family that dropped, one or two words here and whatnot that made me just aware of this alternative version of our history as a so-called
mm,
Black community that isn't often taught. Um, and then from there, it just became it was more passive. It was more just watching the odd YouTube video here and there. And now looking back, there may not have been. And that's what I was saying about sources. There may not have been the most reputable sources, but they were saying the same things that are now coming out in Britannica.com and BBC, BBC
mm,
series of what's it called, Black to the Past or something like that. Um,
mm,
and just passively consuming this information. Um, and so it meant that then going into secondary school, that was interesting because, we know what it's like growing up in East London,
yeah.
and to be frank, it's not it's not all roses, and I'll leave it as that.
Yeah.
Those who know. It's not. Often you hear rappers bragging about certain things, and you're like, the reality isn't as pleasant as that. So,
Yeah.
what they're rapping about isn't pleasant. But anyway, a lot of us make do with what we have, and we make art out of the pain or the inspiration or the motivation.
Hmm.
And the way our upbringing is also a blessing as well. Um, um, so yeah, growing up in East London, knowing all this knowledge, being in secondary school, going to an all boys school and realizing that it's just not common discourse. This sort of information about Black people being kings and queens, and imploring potentially high end levels of, for the time, high end levels of technology and thinking to create great
Hmm.
structures. Uh, Coming up with elaborate writing systems to interpret meanings of the universe, etc., etc.
Hmm.
That's not common. You don't really hear 13, 14-year-old boys, talking about this stuff. So it was sort of
Yeah.
something that I knew, and I kind of just, went along with life. Also being a 13, 14-year-old boy growing up, in East
Yeah.
London, you know, um,
You just want to fit in some way, and so if you
yeah,
recognize this isn't part of the normal discourse, you don't actively go there. Yeah.
exactly. Should it come up, fine. We can discuss
Mm,
it. But otherwise, I didn't. I wasn't. I'm not about preaching. I never was. So
mm,
it's the same sentiment that carried through. Up until I left. I left uni. Um,
yeah.
yeah, and that's been my journey with the knowledge. It happened at a really young age, and I think where I feel really fortunate is that I finally figured out a way to share this in a way that was easily digestible. You know, and like I
Mm,
say, that suited, quite frankly, uh, my way of seeing the world, which was that. when we put all the politics aside of black versus whatever,
Mm-hmm.
of red versus blue, right and left, the truth will always speak for itself.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like as long as you have access to the information, you can then make up your mind.
Mm.
You know? And each individual has to walk that path of determining and building their own belief system. I don't see the point in trying to impose an opposing view to something else. If your truth is so exact and it's so true, there's no need for you to convince me. You don't need to defend it because it's the truth. What we're
Yeah.
seeing is, and I don't think it's a bad thing. What we're seeing is a lot of discourse. And why I say I don't think it's a bad thing, because in some instances it's quite healthy to have discourse and opposing views, because hopefully either side will gain a greater understanding of the other. Agreement
Mm-hmm.
agreement may not necessarily be, guaranteed, but
Yeah.
understanding is great. It widens the horizon of possibility and of viewpoints of the world.
Mm.
Um, and so in that sense, a bit of discourse there is fine. But if you're of these monks and stuff, they're just dead quiet. you know, um, a part of me feels like they're just like everything is. Do you know what I mean? So life will show you what it needs to show you. And it's that same sentiment I think that I've come with Hidden Pages. It's just it's purely
Uh,
educational. Here's the information.
and
Do what you will with it.
do what you will. Yeah, I really agree with you, because I feel like sometimes what can happen with these kind of conversations is that we then we can't compartmentalize people and the way they think and their ideals. And I think what's important is to talk about, okay, what are the common experiences? And it obviously, with what's happened, it obviously shows that there tends to be a common experience that is felt by people who look like me and you. Um, and while that's true, we still all have very different ways of either interpreting it, what we think are the solutions, how we think how we think we should live in this world. There's such a variety of ways of seeing, and I think as well it almost also limits what we're fighting for, or what people actually want, because with equality, what that actually allows us to do is to then be individuals and not be
Mm.
cast as this group. You represent this group. It's instead Sam or Dami or Ayo or Babatunde or whoever it is. They
Mm-mm.
are an individual first. And I think that, and then they have agency to them as their own person, rather than casting um, this either way a group thinks or the stereotypes or anything. You take them
Yeah.
as they are individually, and I think that's also important. Um, what I was going to come on to, though, surrounding that, because you said it wasn't common discourse, and obviously a lot of conversations right now are talking about people, I guess, furthering their knowledge of these things. Um, Obviously, for yourself and for myself, serendipitously, we've come into contact with some of this knowledge, which has then allowed us to puff our chests out a bit more and be and have a bit more self-esteem and a bit more knowledge that actually we're we come from a line of great individuals like any other race, and actually we're just individuals in this world.
Yeah.
However, for a lot of people, they haven't been that fortunate. And some people have pointed to the academic system or the educational system in the UK. And before I share my own opinion on it, I'd love to hear what you think the if the current academic system has any responsibility to shed light on this knowledge, or if it should come from outside,
Mm.
where, like, obviously that's something that you're addressing with your page. Is there anything systematic that you think can also be done too? I'd just love to hear what you think about it,
Yeah,
because I'm sure it's something you've delved into, especially of late.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I wrote my undergrad dissertation on this, and
Mm,
interviewed, you know, teachers of history and students as well. And from memory of that research that I did, conducting those interviews, the teachers basically don't feel like they have sufficient resources
mm,
to teach about so-called Black history and to this depth. So that's a summary of one of the issues from a teacher's perspective.
mm,
From the students, they just generally, and to this day, in fact, um, and I proved that point later on, um, the students just didn't feel like there was sufficient information being taught about Black history. Now,
mm,
on the point of to this day, there was a survey that went around, I think called The Impact of Omission, that was set up by, I think someone who's recently graduated. It was a young lady. And essentially, what the survey, in summary, asked people, what did you learn at school? And do
mm,
you feel like you received sufficient information about, and then, you know, X list of subjects? Overwhelmingly, there was a lack of information regarding the breadth and impact of the British Empire.
mm,
Those statistics were then created from those, the survey, the thousands, the tens of thousands of survey completes that took place.
mhm,
And then a petition then went forward to Parliament. I recently got an email, which was an update of Parliament's response, or rather the government's response to that petition, based on this quite robust set of data. We're talking about
mm.
tens of thousands of people here,
Yeah.
filling in the height, in the height of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Mhm.
Obviously, there is no height; it's still going.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, the response was basically, in summary, the opportunity is there for teachers to teach, about Black history, about the British Empire, um, and that in a summary, that's what it was saying. The
Yeah.
opportunity is there. So, but of course, when you phrase something, well, when something is framed in that way, or the underlying message is the opportunity is there, what that does is also allow for room of the interpretation of, well, it's not compulsory.
Mhm.
If the opportunity is there, that's not the same as saying that it's compulsory. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that Black history, well, actually, yeah, I think it would be a good idea for Black history to be compulsory, considering that, again, the oldest complete skeleton of modern Britons looked like you and I, and had hair like you and I, other than the fact that it was straighter.
Mhm.
Now, in our society, we always pay homage to the ancestors that came before us. If we're paying homage to Churchill, you know, and to the Thatchers, etc., etc., why wouldn't you then pay homage to your
Yes.
biological, anatomical ancestry?
Tell them,
What,
Sam. Tell them.
what's
Tell them.
what's the distinction? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mm.
pay homage. So based on that, I'd say, yeah, it's pretty important. It's pretty compulsory, that you teach that, so that you know that where you who are so-called Caucasian white, you who are so-called Asian, you who are so-called, and more specifically East Asian, South Asian, or whatever, you who are so-called mixed
Mm.
race, whatever, that and are born here
Mm.
on this British soil, what we know is today is Britain anyway, It's pretty
Yes.
important that you know what your earliest ancestors look like, at least what science has discovered of it and has unearthed, and has gone to the lengths
Mm-hmm.
of actually recreating 3D images of what your ancestors look like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So based on that, on what I've just done, like, yeah, actually, no, yeah, yeah, good idea to make it compulsory. There's no harm in that, you know. So
Yeah.
to answer your question, going through that logical process, I think, yeah, there is a responsibility for the British education system to ensure that it's compulsory, and that to show that it's compulsory to teach so-called Black history, and not only not, not only just to teach Black history, but the fact that Black history is human history. It doesn't have to be like an addendum.
Mm.
It doesn't have to be something that fits in.
Yes.
More recognition rather just needs to go towards it. It's
100%.
something that needs to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
It just needs more spotlight. That's all it is. It's already part of it's already part of British history. It's not
Yeah.
about teaching more Black history. It's saying, no, look at the full breadth of it, unearth it.
Yeah.
And as Carla said, tell the whole truth. Just tell the whole truth. you
Tell the
know
whole truth.
and the concern is for those who are wondering, what is it intentional, is it not, that history is being so-called whitewashed, that so-called Black people are being marginalized from history or whatever. Is it intentional?
Mm-hmm.
The concern is that by looking at what the prevalence by looking at the prevalence of which so-called Black history is taught, the concern is that it isn't sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's intentional or not, it's not sufficient. People feel like it's not sufficient. There's been so many surveys and studies,
Yeah.
and I've partaken in that study, that corpus of studies. You know, um, I myself ran what we call an omnibus survey with 2,000, a sample of 2,000 people,
Yeah.
and the results basically came out to show that only 1% of the British population amongst that sample, which was nationally representative,
Mm-hmm.
would reference a non-white person as the most important person in British history. Notwithstanding the fact that Cheddar Man, again, the oldest complete
Mm.
skeleton of modern Britons, you know,
Yeah.
it makes you think. But, and of course, I'm not necessarily advocating for imposing that, you know, so-called white people should also, they have to rank Cheddar Man as the most important, and they have to rank Mary
Mm-hmm.
Seacole, Oluwade Equiano as the most important, and Saint Maurice, and all these other
Mm-hmm.
so-called, and they must rank them as significantly, the most important. I'm not. That's not what I'm imposing. That's not my message. Because again, as we said at the beginning, right, everyone's an individual. So someone might be important for Bob because of a
Yeah.
particular affinity that they may have with that person in history. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
Bob wants to be a firefighter, and so a firefighter, who lived X amount of years ago, who saved X amount of people, would be the most important person for Bob.
Yeah.
There are so many different individual factors that will constitute whether someone's important, someone or not, in summary.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not refuting that. But it's quite worrying when you think
Yeah.
about and you discover that there were Black queens of England, that you had African Romans who
Mm.
came and did shifts in, you know, early stage Britain, you know, African Romans who were generals and emperors.
Yeah.
And that sort of information is unearthed. You kind of just sit back and think, that's a pretty big deal here. How did that go amiss? How have I
How?
seen that looks like me, in the curriculum? You can imagine how how world changing it would be for a little so-called black girl to be in class and to hear that, yeah, there were two black queens of England. That completely shifts the game. It completely shifts the game for a little black boy, so-called, to be in class and hear, oh yeah, by the way, the early, Cheddar Man, earliest complete skeleton of modern Britons. Yeah, he had skin like you. That already in that child's very spongy, susceptible mind, you're embedding the knowledge of a legacy and a significant one left by those who look like that child. A lot of our traumas, our triggers only come to light. I wouldn't say necessarily only come to light, but come to light when we're adults. And that's usually because of the things that are kept in our subconscious.
Yeah.
So, if you're in a particular environment and you're kind of feeling a bit inferior or whatever, you kind of got to be like, where'd that come from? And you track back, right? And you track back and you track back and you start to go early and early in childhood and you think, oh gosh, okay, cool. Well, one thing I'd say constituting that would be, what was I taught? What was revealed to me and what wasn't?
Yeah. What
Because
built the
sometimes,
foundation?
what built the foundation? Because sometimes it isn't necessarily that you're shown a bad example. Sometimes it's just that you're not shown the right example or a particular example, you know? And so that's why schools have a very, very important responsibility to teach the breadth of British history in a way that gives due credit and acknowledgement of the existence of so-called black people throughout this nation's history. And until that is achieved, there's always going to be an issue with it, always. And to be frank, although I say, yeah, they have responsibility, at the same time, like, don't even wait. Don't even wait for them. If you come across a page like Hidden Pages or Black History Walks or the Bookman Academy or UK Black History, all these other Instagram accounts that you see that also teach Black history, whatever, delve into it, educate yourself. Because now as you get older, what you can see is that there's a lot of stuff that this school system doesn't teach you. And it's only when you get to about your mid-20s, you're like, wait, what? Like, forget even history, just even, financial literacy.
I was just about to say, bro, like,
do you know what I mean?
The fact that, no, we're not taught about credit, mortgages, what good financial spending habits, that our spending habits are really tied to our emotional well-being, and we have all these different triggers, like all this stuff, which is basically what adult life is once you leave school, or even in school towards the latter stages when you start doing those side jobs. And the fact that we're not taught about these basic or supposedly basic human skills from such a young age is a travesty.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, it makes me really feel like it's intentional, or I don't know, because those things as well, obviously with Black history, there's a bit more of a contentious point, like you were saying, about how it's put into the curriculum and whether it's just like kind of slotted in, all right, we're going to pack it in this place, or whether actually it's just part of all the other history that we actually learn. Like it's part of everything and just seen as history. If that makes sense. But yeah,
100.
Sorry, you were saying, like, even despite all the things that we're not taught, or we realize as we got older that we're not taught so many things.
Exactly that. And I think that's why I also say, yeah, they've got a responsibility, but the individual also has a responsibility too. Now you know that you'll still have certain politicians telling you, I'd only kneel for the Queen. That's a huge statement. It makes me smile. There's a sense of relief there because I'm like, can you see now? Can you see? Like,
Yeah.
for those who can't see, or for those who are like, it's not that deep, whether they be white, black, purple, orange, pink, mixed race,
Hmm.
whatever it is, cat, dog, you know, in my head, I'm like, can you see that he might not, even in him saying that he'd only kneel for the queen, he might not even necessarily be saying that with maliciousness, but it indicates how far removed he is from understanding the interpretation of the act of taking the knee.
Yeah.
The interpretation of the act of taking the knee by a certain group of people and their allies. That's how far, and so this is why
Wow.
I'm like, for as much as we want to be like, they are this and they are that. I know I did post something on Instagram a long time ago, which was basically, how do you know that certain people are inherently evil or inherently wicked? It could just be that they're operating through the veil of their conditioning and their circumstance. It could just be that certain people aren't necessarily inherently maliciously racist, but that offhand jokes or dodgy jokes are the norm. And they don't because they haven't interacted with someone who is necessarily the other, they haven't yet experienced what harm that might cause to the other, of which that joke is based on.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? So of course, you can only excuse certain behaviors to a point. At some point, you're going to be like, well, nah, they're just being you know, so and so, because they know full well that it's offensive. There's,
Yeah.
you can always be like, well, nah, you draw the line. Like, now they're all adults. They've watched enough movies. There's enough of Dave Chappelle and all these other comedians to let them know whether they be white, black, whatever, and they're being educated in different ways, so they should be more sensitive. But
Mm.
basically, I saw that to say, yeah, there's responsibility, but you can't wait. Don't
Yeah.
wait.
I'm
Act.
I'm yeah, I'm in like big agreement with that. I in terms of responsibility as well, it's funny because I see it very similar to you. And even I was talking about this on another podcast recently where I was saying that the reason that there's a responsibility is because the aim of school is, I guess, to gear people up for the so-called real world, and I guess draw out the value that's within them. I think that's what educate means in its root form, to like draw out the
Right.
will draw out what's within. And I always I found it funny because when I was looking back on the school system recently, I was thinking, wow, like when you deep it, especially in schools in East London, like how we grew up, or anywhere which is quite diverse in the country. um I always find it funny that you'll have such an array of backgrounds and races, more specifically. So you have people from loads of different places around the world, from Nigeria, Ghana, Jamaica, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Um, you have people from China, or from um, Argentina, maybe, or Colombia, or wherever else in the world, all in this classroom, all learning. And when we're learning about history, we're never given the context of how all of us got to be in this classroom when we talk about British history. And I've always just found that so funny because it's almost like we get to so we start off with, maybe in our case, for black people, so there was a transatlantic slavery, then it kind of ended, and then there was the civil rights movement in America, and then suddenly, Dami, you just ended up in London, or Sam, you ended up in London, or Pooja, you just ended up here, or whoever else just magically appeared, and there's no context for why. Okay, we might not be a dominant part of society in terms of the numbers, but there's quite a lot of people. Oh, you're from Nigeria as well. You're from Nigeria as well. Loads of people from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. How did this happen? And
Yeah.
it's always like, yeah, no, we're not going to tell you how that happened. So I always find it, I always find that quite funny, just
Yeah.
how it's skirted over. So, um, how, like, do you think we as the people then can systematically bring that education? So I'm trying to find the right way to put it, but in my head, I'm thinking of another means of a wide proportion of the population being able to access this, or having ease, like an easy way of them having the information put in front of them from a young age, because I feel like at a young age, then you're more open to learning. I feel
Yeah.
like with a lot of maybe the older generation, even people in their 20s who are maybe not from our backgrounds, and so this type of information might trigger some certain latent things within them. Do you think there's a way that we can systematically capture the youth, and I mean like really young, so that they're at least aware, and then from that point then they can at least make a more informed choice? Do you think there's a way that we can do that as the people?
Yeah. I think so. So again, although I say that, yeah, the government has a responsibility, the most powerful way of achieving what you said is if we start with ourselves. So I
Mm,
start with my family, you know.
mm,
I'm like, look, I'm doing this thing called Hidden Pages. Check it out, you know, and share with people that you know.
mm,
We start with ourselves. You know, we've been waiting for way too long. We've marched, we've done this, we've done that. You know, I held, meditation sessions in the heat of this George Floyd incident,
mm,
because I wanted to hold a space for people to feel calm, you know,
mm,
and and to reiterate the point that this is not a trend. This George Floyd thing is not a trend. It's not a hashtag. So, like, muster up your energy, because again, you know, people will forget whether you're in the diaspora or outside. That's the truth, and people won't tell you that. People will forget and they'll move on. They got bills to pay. They got kids to look after. They're going through their own issues with family matters. There's certain things people don't necessarily maliciously ignore. They're just trying to figure themselves out and trying to be on their own two
mm,
feet. So
mm,
anyway, I say all of that to say examples of, things like Hidden Pages, the meditation sessions that I held and whatnot. It's about doing it for self. So
mm,
don't wait for, if your child does come home one day and he or she is like, oh, today we learned about, Cheddar Man, or today we learned about Queen Charlotte, or the first person to reach, the North Pole. Don't leave it there. Keep going.
mm,
Keep introducing them to different sources
mm,
that are easily digestible for that child's, I wouldn't necessarily say age, because some children are, especially when it comes to so-called black children, there's been so many studies that show that at certain young ages, a particular
yeah.
younger age, they excel beyond, their other ethnic counterparts.
Mhm,
Many studies that I'd implore your listeners to go and look into. um But it's important to know also, Dami, that there are a lot of people doing the work, like loads. Hidden Pages compared to other people, actually it hasn't got the most sizable following. Fortunately, thank God we've crossed the threshold of 1,000 people, which is, I'm just happy that a lot of, that number of people are even interested in it and they'll keep
mm,
sharing. But just know, again, for the listeners out there, um, particularly of the Afro-Caribbean, Asiatic community, so-called Black community, there are so many people like myself doing the work and are doing great things. You've got the Bookman
mm,
Academy, who are two dudes who have basically set up an online school, and it's free.
mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
And I think maybe when you post this and it's in the post description or whatever, I'll send you some of the sources that I've come across. You've got, of course, Black History Walks. You've got Black
Mm,
Child Promotions, which is a dude that he sells his books, I think, in Brixton and definitely outside Nighttown of Oxford Circus, and he's selling books on Black history. You know,
mm,
you have Black British Archives as well in the UK, which is an
yeah.
organization that is archiving Black. Like, there are so many resources, and this is why I say, this is why I say, I should finish the point, that we should do for self, and that if any allies want to come, come and help us, great. But just know that I don't think we're gonna you're gonna get people caring as much about this issue as the so-called Black community themselves. You know,
Yeah.
and if others refute that point and they're like, no, I care about it too, even though I'm not Black, I'm like, great, that's awesome.
Hmm.
But because we know that you and many others have a life, as well as people within the community have a life, we got to keep running for ourselves. You know, I'm not of that mind of us versus them and excluding whatever. That's not. I'm just do the work. You know, do the work. Don't waste energy trying to put down and fight and this, that, and the fight in the sense of, yeah, fight for more spotlight on our achievements, more spotlight on the injustices, more
Hmm.
spotlight on uh, our potential, financial literacy, Black businesses, that you
Mm,
can invest in, etc. Knowledge of self, whatever spiritual system you want to follow, health. You got the Dr. Sebis, etc., etc. You know, um,
yeah.
in that sense, fight for self development. You know, and keep that focus, but also know that um, the biggest players and the most impactful players are in the community. They might be found outside too, but I'm pretty sure they're going to be within the community too. You know,
For sure.
um, so in terms of, again, to come back to the original question of how can we make this increasing the awareness of Black history easy, accessible, scalable, which I think is what your question is.
Yeah.
Just know that work is being done. To the listeners who are listening to this, go and look at all the names and organizations that I just, um, referenced, and there will be many more that come out to present themselves to the world.
Mm,
There's a new on the point of supporting sort of Black businesses and the importance of economic welfare and generational wealth within the so-called Black community. There is a version of Amazon that has come out for so-called Black retailers, and
ah.
Black vendors as well. Yeah, man. Like,
Yeah.
stuff is happening. People are moving, and that's why, in a way, now I'm less. Before I used to be like, oh, kind of, it's a bit of a shame that people don't really know about this, but now I'm like, actually, it's fine. Like, people know when they know, and it's never too
Mm,
late. Um, and whether the list I give in this podcast is exhaustive or not, at least they know now that people are really doing the work. Like, it's funny because
yeah.
now, oftentimes you hear people saying, oh, we need our own system and we need this and we need that. People are building this.
People are
People are way
doing it.
ahead. People have turned word into action a long time.
Mm,
So the same way how when I was in my living room and I thought to myself, why don't people know what I know? Like, which is obviously like a huge simplification of, what the real issue was. Um,
yeah.
why don't I hear people talking about what I know? The fact that so-called Black people did things throughout history that scientists are still trying to figure out.
Pyramids, man. No
The
one's
pyramids, man.
rebuilt them for shit.
Do you know
Nobody.
what I mean?
No one.
And not only that, but they were in alignment with stars. And you're telling me we've gone through Plato, aristocracy, Ptolemy, Caesar, you name it, Einstein, and
Mm,
we're still deliberating how these pyramids were made.
mm,
So, when you look at it in that context, anyway, you start to think,
wow.
why is this information being talked about? So, it's about doing for self. The help will come. The movement is already started. It's not going to stop. There is this definitely very much pro so-called Black not necessarily anti anything else, but
Mm-hmm.
pro progression. Because people
Mm-hmm.
have realized, as many say, um, forget trying to change the system, just make a new one, you know,
Mm,
make a new system. And, you'll see officials and corporations always follow the streets. That's what
yeah.
happens. They only jump on things that are popular, that are not in the, you know, I wouldn't say only, sorry, but they tend to jump on things that are not popular necessarily, or overtly popular or discussed in the corporate realms or the political realms. So
Mm-hmm.
stuff like grime for Corbyn. We know that grime originated in East London. So when you're seeing
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that in political campaigns, there you can already see the impact of art and music
Mm,
pioneered
yeah.
predominantly by so-called black people. And that's just a common thing. You see it in fashion, and
Mm,
it's no surprise that that's still the case, actually, because again, when you look at the Moors and what they brought in terms of all their scientific and philosophical and religious contributions,
yeah.
they influenced Europe heavily. So it's no
Yeah.
surprise that you'd
Mm-hmm.
have, again, hundreds of years later, so-called black influence proliferating the
Mm,
world.
through
um
society. Yeah.
exactly. And that's not to say, oh, it's only so-called black people who will come up with innovative things. What it is to say is that we've been at pretty much everything that's that's come in, into existence, in terms of tech
Mm,
advancements.
and that,
That's what it is to say.
yeah, and that changes the narrative for everyone when they
Yeah.
become aware of that, of who we are and what we represent. Obviously, we have these stereotypes that are attached to us, but these, once the history of these contributions and achievements and even just way of living become aware to people, it dismantles that narrative of the stereotypes um, that are commonly attached to us. And I actually think that in a big way, so obviously you mentioned about the investment into black businesses and finance and gaining economic power,
Mm.
so to speak. I really think it's an important um, discussion to have, and why I really am behind the Black Pound Day
Mm.
as a movement, because now it seems to have penetrated. It seems to have been something that's come at the right time, and now it's got this. It's got the foundations to hold its weight. I honestly think that over the years, it's going to become quite a powerful thing, and
Yeah.
just understanding that, what you were saying earlier about corporations and organizations jumping on influence. I honestly believe that once you have black businesses which are at a scale where, they can start, telling Tesco, Sainsbury's, Marks and Spencer, yo, you're going to have to change some things up in here if you want to stock our product in your shops. I feel like there's going to be some big movements in the way society, um, in how society views us once those businesses have reached that kind
Mm.
of scale, because now you can't afford to have those prejudices. Like, you have to check yourself because it
Yeah.
could hit you in the pocket.
Yeah.
So
Which is sad in a way, because it's like, and sorry, not to cut your flow, but
no,
it's sad because it shows that, money's the thing that talks. And as many have said, it's only when you hit the system and certain things in their pocket, then they start scrambling.
mm,
You know, now you're seeing, a lot of corporations who posted a black square, were probably afraid of people saying, "Oh, why didn't you say anything?" And then
mm,
mad boycotts just happening on social media. So they were like, "No, no, let's avoid that. Let's post this square." You know,
mm.
knowing truly, and the beauty of that is that it shows that social movements can even affect. Sorry, what? Yeah, probably infect, actually. Can probably affect capital,
Mm.
you know, where is the social consciousness, you know, and are you aligned with that as a business? Are you showing yourself to be aligned with that as a business? Because if you're not, you might lose some, you know, some revenue,
Mhm.
you know. So it's interesting that there's what's becoming more apparent now is a cyclical relationship between uh, capital and social movement,
Yeah.
you know, and maybe more specifically, social consensual social sentiment. And why I say consensual is because
Mhm.
obviously consensus doesn't necessarily mean all, you know,
Yeah.
um, not all the time anyway, but rather the majority. So the majority are like, yo, Black Lives Matter, like so on and so on, you
Mhm.
know, and what are you doing as a corporation to ensure that your staff are, you know, representative of the nation?
Mhm.
Uh, you know, what are you doing to support the cause and fight for equality? And there's so many different movements where this is happening. It's happening with feminism, LGBTQ. It's happening with
Mhm.
able-bodied. It's happening with, and rather, sorry, the correct, some would say the politically correct term is physical impairment, you know,
Mhm.
levels of that to substitute disabilities. There's so many different movements now where people are being called upon, organizations are being called upon to be like, what are you doing to ensure that
Mhm.
your corporate structure represents equality as well, you know?
Mm.
So now it becomes tricky because, you know, you kind of have to discern, is that corporation's intention
Yeah.
legitimate, or is it just because there's some capital at risk here, you know?
Mm.
And so now it's like, oh, whether it's money rules the world or not, who's to say? But it's
Yeah.
definitely integral to how the world runs. And perhaps now what's most important to look at now is social consensual social sentiment.
Mm. I think because we live in a capitalist system that has really governed what you just mentioned, a consensual social, what was the last,
Sentiment.
sentiment. That's a really interesting point because I can imagine that, or not even imagine, I I'm pretty certain that a lot of companies, um, maybe in the 50s and 60s during the civil rights movement, weren't standing with Martin Luther King at that point in time,
Hey,
or
what, he was
figures
a
like
threat.
Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, because it's not hitting our pockets, so we don't care. But now, because I think both because I feel like as a community, um, the black community has gained some power in the society. Maybe not to the level of equality that people want to see, but there's definitely been an improvement. And one of the areas to look at is, you know, you kind of touched on it when you mentioned grime for Corbyn, is, you know, the grime scene and the black urban music scene and how much it's dominate or seeped into the British culture. You know, you've got so many MCs and artists becoming millionaires through the music that they've created for this community. Whereas in previous generations, you know, maybe you have one or two that break out, but right now there's such a wealth of that available. And then obviously that's then trickled into fashion, like you mentioned. And as a result now, you know, the community's been building their capital, and then suddenly, you know, you can invest in a clothing line or invest in, you know, other types of businesses. So I think now those large corporations, I guess, showing respect, I guess, is in some way part of the process. Like, this is
Yeah.
the process of the change
Yeah. And
change
that is so
happening.
funny because slavery served capitalist endeavors, you know, especially the
Mm.
transatlantic slave trade. It bolstered capitalism. And the reason why it was maintained for so long is because of the fruits that it bore for a capitalist society.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So racism was really good for business, as bad as that sounds. You
Yeah.
know, from the so-called white, so-called Eurocentric, so-called Caucasian perspective, of course, not labeling everyone as evil, whatever. Um, for those who really, you know, who wanted to just like maximize the capitalist machine, racism was good for business. And it's funny because I
Mm-hmm.
actually came across a video of a caller saying racism is a business. It was like maybe like a 5 minute video, and it was between 3 to 5 years old. And I
Yeah.
think it was the Guardian, and they asked him, or some other major broadcaster, and they asked him something like, "What is racism?" Anyway, the point of him being there was to clarify what racism is, um,
Mm-hmm.
and what to do about it. I think it was something like what to do about how to solve racism. Big
Mm-hmm.
questions to ask one man.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, what he made a point of saying that racism is a business, and propaganda has been used throughout time to demonize so-called black people,
Mm-hmm.
as aggressive sexual predators, lazy, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and in some instances, used to even um, purport desirable effects of beauty products.
Mm-hmm.
Wash off your dark skin, etc., etc. Or this soap will even wash, the skin of the darkest people, etc. The most horrific things, this and this is the history that is at risk of being forgotten by
Mm-hmm.
European so-called, you know, white society in some parts, not the entirety of, white society so-called, because obviously as we know, not all, X is bad and not all Y is good. Like,
Yeah.
we're all mature enough now to understand that. But um, there is an acknowledgement that needs to come from, Western Eurocentric worlds and their part to play in what has become our contemporary society. Now that's happening. And it's funny because I
Mm-hmm.
actually had a discussion about this. I was saying to someone how you've got, there is there's, there's a trajectory to why we're here, you know, there's a
Mm-hmm.
trajectory and quite maybe not necessarily a clear one, but in summary, you can spell it out, these Eurocentric Western powers went to places all over the world that had natural resources,
Mm-hmm.
pillaged, raped, killed, then went and created a campaign, hundreds of years of sustained racism, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
enslavement based on that racism, fabricated, mind you, fabricated
Mm-hmm.
social constructs of race is what it was based on. All those resources now being pillaged and on these other Western European lands, and then being through a very, long process, those countries now being tied and sort of ironically owing these powers that came and imposed their rules and religions, etc., on
Mm-hmm.
them, owing them now, being tied in this very, having a very short end of the stick,
Yeah.
which then ultimately means that common contemporary society, they're like, okay, cool, well, access to the resources, the natural resources on my land, I don't really have that now because of what's
Mm-hmm.
happened. You guys came over and pillaged everything. I kind of want to make a living for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a pretty logical move, therefore, for people to be like, well, let me go to the land where all the riches are, you know? So, in summary, it's to say that colonialism and imperialism have essentially led us to this, where we are now, essentially, which is the disproportionate mistreatment and marginalization and subjugation of non white people.
Mm-hmm.
in Western, largely white societies. That's what it is.
Mhm.
That's a large part of what it is. Maybe, whoever else is listening to this or wants to rebuttal what's being said will have other things to consider in this journey. But in large part, colonialism, sorry, and imperialism has led to contemporary subjugation, disproportionate socioeconomic opportunities of non-white people across the world,
Yeah.
to the point where now we have these quite interesting rankings of first, second, and third world.
Mm.
An interesting point I came across was when we talked about which countries are really underdeveloped. What is an underdeveloped nation? As with many things in this world, uh, rankings and labels are from a European perspective and a
Yeah.
Western world perspective, right? Now, we've talked about the mad achievements that non-white people have had across the world, building pyramids in alignment with stars being one of them.
Yeah.
There's accounts of kingdoms where staff of kings and queens and ceremonies are draped in gold,
Mm.
where and I paraphrase this from an actual lecture that I went to, hosted by a man called Robin Walker, known as the Black History Man, who was a Carla's mentor, actually, academic mentor.
Oh, at those Sunday schools. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I maybe it might have been at those Sunday schools. I'm not too sure, but he was
Okay.
definitely Robin Walker is definitely one of Carla's mentors.
Sure.
Basically, one of these lectures that I attended, that even the animals, even the animals in attendance in those ceremonies, present in those ceremonies, had gold on them. That's how much gold.
Mm.
That's how much gold that our people had.
Yeah.
In what place in this world, I don't know of any, where you see animals being dressed in gold? Do you know what I mean?
And if
Like
you
where you see
do,
the horses
yeah.
being dressed in elaborate, maybe the occasional horse parades that happen in the UK. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend that I know. But that's the level of gold that you had.
Hmm.
You know. Now I make this point to emphasize the quantity of natural resources that we had, amongst others. Gold just
Yeah.
being one point. Now, if all these places outside of Africa and all these other places that weren't in Europe that had all these natural resources, if they had to go and take all the resources from there, who's really underdeveloped? You know,
Ooh.
who's really underdeveloped? Because essentially,
Mm.
you have that European countries were struggling for natural resources. That is, I don't know of any diamonds that grow on this British soil, but I know there's quite a bit that grow in Sierra Leone. You know, gold, the Golden Coast of Accra and Ghana. You know, or rather, I should say, the Gold Coast, known as Ghana. There are certain countries named after resources because that's how they abundant they are in those resources. So who's really underdeveloped? Who's really underdeveloped? Is it the colonizers that had to come over and pillage all those resources, or is it the nations that had the resources? So we can see here what the big game is. Not only
Yeah.
has there been a physical campaign to strip certain countries of their wealth and subjugate,
Yeah.
but then the other impact, the other um, significant, I say the other significant impact that's happened is through how history is told. Basically, it isn't just the physical war. of pillaging those natural resources didn't stop there. It also became psychological through the propaganda, through the education,
Mm-hmm.
the harmful, stereotypical propaganda, and then the education that failed to teach that these were people that were enslaved. They weren't just slaves. Slaves didn't come from Africa. That's an incorrect term.
Mm-hmm.
People were taken, doctors, nurses, priests, kings, generals, scientists, philosophers were taken from Africa and enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
So even the framing of history and the framing of people in history has a huge effect on the psychology of a people. If you
Definitely.
grow up only, if you grow up with the phrase "black people are slaves," not only is that the most incorrect thing to say, probably one of the most disastrous for someone who has to grow up in this world and make a way for themselves. Because one, they've been taught by society to identify with crayon colors. And so by identifying with a crayon color, they'd say, oh, well, that crayon color black, so cool. Yeah, I'm black. But also, this group of crayon colors are slaves too, or they were slaves, I should say. And that's where the history
Mm-hmm.
started. Of course, we
Mm,
know the history now about Cheddar Man and all these queens, etc., etc.
mm,
So education is massively important, massively, massively important. And it how you tell history, it's integral to the sense of pride and confidence that a people would have.
yeah.
So-called white, so-called Caucasian people know about all these Greeks and all their philosophers, the Aristotles and etc.
Mm-hmm.
What about those who are non-white? What about their great Indian and Chinese philosophers, and African philosophers? What about them? And then obviously you have the case about uh, look at how our contemporary, or up until a certain point, but in our very modern world, cases of where maps of continents
Mm,
are not drawn to the correct proportions. That a
no.
lot of people don't know that the USA, the United States of America, fits into Africa, the continent of Africa, 4 times. Why
Crazy.
don't many people know that? Because the European drawing of the world map scales European countries as bigger than non-European countries.
Mm,
That's going to cause a psychological effect on how non-white people are seeing themselves. Not
mm.
only is my history started in slavery, not only did my history start in slavery, but also my my land isn't as big as European land,
Small.
you know? And
Mm,
that's just one visual representation. Imagine the hundreds of years of visual representation that have been
yeah.
skewed and incorrectly, inaccurately produced, you know, based on ideals of white supremacy,
Yeah.
which again justify subjugation of a certain people and just
Mm,
perpetuate a capitalistic society where non-white people often get the short end of the stick.
it scales, like with those ideals, it scales up to a point where you have a situation which has sparked these conversations to erupt so broadly. Those ideals of us being inferior scale up to somebody believing that they can rest their knee on this guy's neck for as long as they want,
Mm,
because of the, like you mentioned actually, and it's probably really important that we phrase it that way, that racism is a business, it's a campaign. It's just a campaign that's had long lasting legs, really,
mm,
because it's been needed to justify the economy that's sprouted out from
mm,
it, and I guess the campaign of first taking resources and then tying those countries into very dubious financial contracts, which mean that
mm,
even if progress has started to be achieved, the interest rates of the success of that progress mean you start back at square one. Yeah, it sadly and it unfortunately does then justify somebody carrying out those more visceral, dark acts and believing it's okay.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, educating people on, I guess, at the first stage, which is that, we are just normal human beings who fit a wide spectrum of what human beings are capable of doing. Really, I think that's important, because then you just remove the identity and of what the crayon color means. You remove that, you open up the possibilities for
Yeah.
us.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a very important way to go.
And it's saying that it's so interesting because actually I started Hidden Pages because I was tired of I was tired of all the race talk. But I was
Mm,
realizing that, you know what, whether I'm tired of it or not, people still care about it. And
yeah.
I care about those people who care about it. And I want them to know that they've been here for some time. They've been here
Mm,
from time immemorial. They've been here from the beginning, you know. And if the core of a lot of what you're facing about insecurity and not really feeling lost, etc., in this European land and Western world, etc., if that's what's at the core of all your frustration, I'm going to create this thing called Hidden Pages so that you can see yourself in an array of positions, from the first person to climb the North Pole to the first president of North America
mm,
before Barack, you know, the earliest Britain, like, and that it was to serve, and it is to serve as a antidote to the
mm,
frustration, to the feeling lost, to the feeling inferior, to insecurity, and ultimately to add to what you said as well. So to prove to what you said as well, which is that we're just human. Like, before we're not black people. Like, you don't, obviously I get it in contemporary terms, and we use it because that's what everyone uses. And to be
mm,
frank, that's what the tension is over black and other. And
mm,
in terms of black people feeling disproportionately mistreated, regardless of where they are in the world. You look at the caste system in India, the darkest
mm,
ones always, if not always the ones, but necessarily, and I can't speak too much on the system because I'm not an expert of it and that's not my origin. But, it seems to be the case that the darker your skin, the more likely it is that you have trial and tribulation, And I remember Andre 3000 sporting this costume that said, "Why is it that all over the world, the darkest people suffer the most?" You know,
mm,
and people have been making these kind of arguments for time, way before George Floyd. And you and I know this, of course. The beauty, however, is that largely the non-black, non-so-called black community are seeing this now, and so they're
mm,
suddenly being hit with a flood of information now, um, proving the disproportionate treatment of so-called black people with statistics and with the evidence of legacy data, and historical archives, essentially, which are now, again, thanks to the advancements of tech, um, easily accessible. You know, but yeah, when I post all these people on Hidden Pages and I share all their stories and all these civilizations, the hope is that everyone can see, regardless of who or what you are, everyone can
mm.
see that, gosh, these people with melanin dominant skin, they're just people. They built great buildings, and they read and they invented things, and they
Mm.
had children, and they went to war, and they also enslaved people too, and
Yeah.
they were
Mm.
musicians. Like, they're just people. you know,
Mm,
and you know, a part of me is hoping for, and it's okay if it doesn't happen as well, because I think it will still serve its purpose. But moving beyond post a Black History archive, you know,
yeah.
or a Black History Month or Black Pound Day, and that instead what you see is prosperity economically for the Black community every day, Black
Mm-hmm.
history every day,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, and therefore there won't be a need for it. There won't be a need for to make a distinct, you know, a distinction for it to be its own separate category. Um, and that's why, you know, one of the strap lines for Hidden Pages is normalizing Black history. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's normalizing it. You know, it's not necessarily uncovering it, discovering it, unearthing it, or whatever. It's just a normalization of it. That's all that's happening. You know, and I'm aware that everyone, even those who I'm friends with, and who are different ethnicities, etc., we're all in our own echo chambers. And
Yeah.
so it's apparent to me that, well, in that case, I feel like I've kind of got a duty to share, therefore, what I know, because I know I'm part of someone's echo chamber, and I might be the only person in their echo chamber who is saying what I'm saying and sharing the information that I'm sharing, and is even going to the lengths to gather and share that information in a way where they can easily digest it and then go on with the rest of their distractions, you know? Um, and that's also been quite a sobering thought as well, you know, realization, knowing that, yeah, like I'm literally part of someone's timeline and I'm probably the only person who share the kind of information, and therefore I can't be, and that's why I'm like, we can't necessarily be angry at those who are like, seem really ignorant and necessarily, like I said, up to a certain point though, up to a certain point, you know, the
Yeah.
frustration to a certain point, you know, I get that. But to be like just quick to snap at anyone and assume that they're ignorant and assume that they're saying something because of, you know, blah blah blah. We don't even know if they've even had that kind of discussion with someone before.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that realization as well has also made me aware of my personal responsibility that I have
Mm,
as someone who isn't famous, who doesn't have like mad influence, who's not on like social media 24/7, whatever, trying to be like a personality or a somebody, but just as a person who is just, you know, gathering and disseminating this data. And again, that ties into what I was saying about not waiting. You know, I'm not waiting to be a member. You know, if I even had those aspirations to be super famous or to be an MP or whatever, to share this information, I'm not waiting. I'm not
yeah.
waiting for that. You know,
Uh, it's
so yeah,
yeah. It's powerful because you what you just said like really hit me, and I just in a lot of different for a lot in a lot of different ways and for a lot of different areas that you could be the one person in someone's echo chamber that posts something or shares something which plants a seed. And even if it's someone who may subconsciously disagree with you, just you sharing that bit of content and planting that seed might be the first step that breaks them out of their way of thinking. And I feel like that's another point to make. And looking at the time, I feel like we're coming we're wrapping up, but I feel like it's a really good point to hit home on, in that we have the power to cause that domino effect. And like you said earlier, if we've done the work on ourselves, then it's easier for us to then drop that seed that then hits someone else, and then they start to grow their plant and their tree and then start to drop their own seeds. And actually that could be a very powerful way to bring about that change, and even more powerful, bring about the normalization. I think I love that message, man. Normalizing Black history so that it is just history, and these are just businesses and they're just people.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. and we'll get there. The work has already started. It started long before this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, before the year 2000, people have been doing this work. Um, you know, and it has just been a matter of time. You know,
Mm,
you can't keep doing the same things, expecting, uh, you know, for what I want to say is this revolt that we've seen in society is no surprise. You
mm-hmm.
know, a long, 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 long time coming. You know, and I think uh, those who are in charge of education systems, etc., and authorities, legal authorities, have had so many examples to learn from, and
Mm,
you know, society is just like, nah, I'm not gonna wait anymore. You know, now we'll shout wherever we can. You know, we'll boycott you where you what you really care about, which is your money in your wallet. You know, and we'll put your companies on blast. You know, and we'll tell our peers, and if you're a celebrity or an influencer, we'll tell our fans to boycott you too. You know, so
mm,
you know, it's sad that it kind of took capitalist interests to really conjure up it, you know, attention to the cause. But it is what it is. And to be frank, if that's what the society was built up on, you know, which was capitalistic endeavors largely based on slavery and colonization, imperialism, then it would be the exit out as well, you know. And
yeah.
until that, there's a real discussion and a real earnestness from the higher ups, whoever they may be, um, to really, you know, make a positive social change, and for us to all, you know, achieve this grand utopia of living in harmony, etc., etc. You know, like I just know there's a whole lot of people that aren't waiting.
Mm,
They're just not waiting, and they've started their own academies. They're sharing information, you know, and they're elevating themselves and
for
those
sure,
around them.
man. And Sam, you're one of those people that has taken action and you know, in my opinion, created a really great platform for us to learn about um, Black history and Black history with context for loads of different eras in time. And some of the things that I noticed um, over the past couple months in terms of content you put out is you know, the 3D reconstructions of different Black people from widely different times. One, the first Britain you mentioned, Cheddar Head, and then the other one that I noticed, Beachy Head Lady. So really just contextualizing and normalizing us in society. And I feel like for just anybody who is listening and interested in learning more about the truth of us being present in society since the dawn of time, um, where can people find more information and hidden pages and some of the content you're putting out? Let them
Yeah,
know.
for sure. Yeah, so I appreciate the opportunity to plug it. All the content is free, of course. So it's at underscore hidden pages, all spelt like how you usually would. Um, So that's, yeah, at underscore HIDDENPAGES. And that's on Insta, and on Twitter. It's the same handle. And then for Facebook, it's uh, at Hidden Pages 9. So that's at Hidden Pages and number 9. I'm more active on Insta because that's where my larger following is, admittedly. But yeah, definitely aware that, you know, all that energy kind of needs to be transferred over to Twitter and Facebook, and that will be happening. Mark my words for that. So yeah, that's where you
Yeah.
can find me. And yeah, like, get in touch. If you got any questions, anything you'd like me um to post, or if there's a different alternative way to post some of this information,
Mm.
get at me, and I'll definitely consider that.
Uncle Sam.
Hey.
Bro. ah, it's been
Bro,
it's been real, man. I've really enjoyed this conversation, man. And
Likewise, bro.
like you've always been a fountain of knowledge, and I've always loved talking about these nuanced, deeper topics with you. And yeah, man, I love what you're doing, and um, I hope that it reaches a point where there's a lot of people that are really starting to make change based on what you're putting out into the world, man. So thank you for being on the show.
I appreciate that so much. Thank you for having me, man. Like I said, it's an honor. Like what you're doing is so dope. Like honestly, keep plugging away. It's inspirational. Um, I appreciate the work you're doing, and then also the people that you're bringing on board to share, their perspectives of the world, and it's all like really enlightening and powerful stuff. So thank you for being you, and for creating this space of Garden of Eden, man.
Um, Man, thank you, man. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Um, so yeah, for everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. And please go check out Sam's stuff, especially if you're like, oh, I don't really know much about Black history. Bro, you should be off this episode now on his Instagram page. So get on it, especially if you're listening on Spotify. Get on it. Get on it now.
Go and enjoy it. Enjoy it. It's all
Yeah.
free. Go and enjoy it.
All right, everyone. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye. Hey, so thanks for watching this episode on the Garden of Eden. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have, of course, got some value from this. Um, Also, if you want to see more content from me and little bits of the show before they go live, please follow either my Instagram channel at Dami Edun or the podcast's Instagram channel at Garden of Edun _. And yeah, I'll be looking to give you some more content on those platforms. Yeah, thanks for listening. Safe.